The Black Ops 7 reveal probably went about as good as a car crash can go online. It's a little bit grim, but for whatever reason, you just can't stop watching it. Honestly, the really big difficulty with this year's Black Ops release is that it almost feels like even if you just took away whatever game happened to be releasing this year, there is a really negative air for Call of Duty heading into their future releases. Whilst Call of Duty HQ was supposed to be this sort of merging of the franchise into one playable space, I think what it's actually done is kind of made every Call of Duty feel quite samey, even though they have been radically different. Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3, despite sharing the same franchise, were two very different and very distinct games. But what I think more it's done in terms of damage for this franchise is that everybody now associates Call of Duty with a handful of things that, because it's all tied together into one ecosystem, seemingly is never going to change. Call of Duty, by default, as of the last 5 years, and something that's just definitely not going to improve, has terrible netcode and server infrastructure that even if you're on low ping and allegedly on 60Hz multiplayer servers, still feels horrific. Call of Duty, secondly, now is just associated with Ricochet anti-cheat, which, I mean, do I even need to say anything anymore? Like, I've made countless videos on this channel about servers, anti-cheat, things that Call of Duty are fundamentally getting wrong, and that problem is not set to improve. Yes, it looks like they've finally decided to enable secure boot, and we will touch on that a little bit later, because honestly I think that tells more about how Call of Duty operates than anything else. But the anti-cheat has not really had a good stretch of time where it's been functioning for probably more than a month or two straight without completely failing. And I'm not even talking about, failing where there's a couple of cheaters here and there. I'm talking multiple cheaters in every single game, especially in Warzone, ranked play both in multiplayer and in Warzone basically being completely unplayable, and for entire swathes of Black Ops 6's lifecycle, allowing cheaters to basically dominate the top leaderboards for things like ranked play, and in some cases, get away with it. The association now that Call of Duty just doesn't have a functioning anti-cheat is basically an all-time high, and there's not really much that they can do to save that because honestly, it is just the case. And the final association is ultimately that Call of Duty is a skill-based matchmaking environment that I think most people would say at this point leads to more frustrating play sessions than enjoyment. Coming off the back of Battlefield 6, and whilst I don't think these two games are comparable and I don't think they're quote-unquote competing with each other, it was really refreshing playing a game that very clearly doesn't have skill-based matchmaking. It had team balancing, but not skill-based matchmaking. And then going into Call of Duty, where not only does my matchmaking in Warzone take 5 to 10 minutes because it refuses to put me in lower level lobbies, but also just that the matchmaking is designed in a way to burn you out. You are constantly playing people of the same caliber or better than you, and it doesn't matter whether you're a really high KD player or a low KD player, that is always the case. The lack of randomness essentially means that the game has designed by design that you are going to play the sweatiest games of your life, regardless of your skill level. And because that is the case, most people find themselves dropping Call of Duty fairly quickly or moving on to another game to play something else, because they just find themselves in that loop of being in those sweaty matches. So by and large, before Black Ops 7 was even revealed, this was already going to be an uphill battle, and I think ultimately people have drawn tired of the idea that new iterations of Call of Duty are going to fix or change anything, because the reality is, they won't. Most of the time, new Call of Duties at this point are just a content refresh. It's new multiplayer, it's new zombies, it's new campaign, but the underlying core issues that the vast majority of the internet are actually talking about, and the vast majority of Call of Duty's own fan base and audience is talking about, grow completely ignored. And honestly, I don't care how many blog posts Call of Duty puts out about their anti-cheat at this point, and I mostly don't care about white papers where they claim to care that ping-based matchmaking is something that they actually think about, because the reality on the ground is radically different. We all know that Ricochet anti-cheat doesn't work, we all know the server infrastructure is terribly put together and the netcode in this game is not fit for purpose, and we all know that skill-based matchmaking is far more dominant than pin-based matchmaking, and I can prove that for a fact by just simply loading into Warzone right now and taking 10 to 15 minutes to find a game. Despite the fact that there is a server literally within 2 to 3 milliseconds of ping from my house. So then we roll into the Black Ops 7 reveal, and I think what's really frustrating about this reveal is that I actually don't think Black Ops 7 looks like a bad game. I think the zombies is ultimately continuing what they did in Black Ops 6, which was widely pretty successful with that audience, and is moving it into an even larger space, allegedly with one of the largest zombies maps ever seen. The entire story is taking place in the Aether as well, which is probably going to give them a lot more creative freedom going forward with Black Ops 7, so that already looked pretty positive. The multiplayer, despite your feelings about wall jumping or how you potentially feel about a slightly futuristic aesthetic, actually looks pretty decent. Like, I actually think they're going for a Black Ops 2 style level of grounding. They seem to have toned down Omni movement a little bit, although weirdly at the same time have added this jumping mechanic. But it looks like they're very clearly targeting a Black Ops 1, Black Ops 2 feeling in that game, and that kind of shows through in some of the gameplay. So from a content standpoint, there actually are things about Black Ops 7 that look pretty good, and if you go and watch content creators' information about the actual game itself, which for whatever reason wasn't always directly included in the actual reveal they did, there are some redeeming elements. I don't think, again, it's the most phenomenal game in the world. I think it's going to be a Black Ops game, and I think if you like Black Ops games, you're probably going to like Black Ops 7. But if you don't like modern, more futuristic Call of Duty games, you're not really going to find yourself gelling with this. The reveal itself for this game was very poorly executed, and I think in a lot of ways, probably is one of the worst reveals I've seen for a shooter in quite some time, and feels like it actually wasn't meant to happen. Call of Duty does COD Next, where they show off all their information and then show you gameplay from content creators. So doing this reveal a month beforehand and throwing lots of information out into the wild kind of feels like a requirement that they had as a result of being part of Xbox and not really something they wanted to do. Now, really frustratingly, one of the information pieces that was confirmed by Call of Duty is that Black Ops 7 was greenlit, concerted, and developed alongside Black Ops 6, but they think that the game has its own identity and innovations. Now, there is a whole conversation to be had about going from one Black Ops game to another, or Modern Warfare 2 to Modern Warfare 3, or Black Ops 6 to Black Ops 7, and how that's inevitably going to lead to fatigue. But the predominant issue about this reveal, and I think why it left such a sour taste in everybody's mouth, is that not only did they have all of these issues that I discussed going into this reveal, they actually made the problem worse by revealing what they revealed. Now, we know that Call of Duty has a backlog of core fundamental problems that seemingly aren't going to improve or change. And in this reveal, they kind of touched on some of those core fundamental problems, or at least alluded to some of them, or at the bare minimum touched on what I would consider to be really important community subjects, and ended up producing conflicting information. And there was a couple of examples of this. The first one is that there is this new movement system. Now, in the actual reveal, they've said that they have heard the feedback about Omni movement and have tuned it. And most people, after watching some of the small snippets of gameplay from that reveal, and just seeing what Black Ops 6 seemingly was, and the general negative sentiment around Omni movement, would believe that Omni movement has been scaled back. And at the same time, they've also added a jump to the game that allows you to jump off of walls. Now, granted, I actually don't think this looks bad, and I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world, but it seems very strange to scale back Omni movement and then add a wall jump. So you're taking away movement and then adding movement, so there doesn't seem to be a clear direction here. There also seems to be a very interesting clip where one of the developers almost seemingly actually does have a wall run, but that wall run actually just turns into a jump. Now, I personally do believe that wall running was entirely planned for this game, but was cancelled as a result of overwhelming negative public sentiment. But there is no necessarily hard evidence of that, except for the fact that the files were in Black Ops 6 for a period of time. Now, even if jumping is added to the game, which honestly, again, I'm not even necessarily against, I don't think it looks terrible. Some people obviously have hard feelings about that kind of style and aesthetic of Call of Duty games, especially things like Infinite Warfare and Advanced Warfare. They've added jumps to the game, but you can't aim down sight while sliding or diving or jumping, unless you equip dexterity. So again, there's just this three entire separate prong issue of movement where Omni movement's been scaled down, but they've added jumping, which is more movement, but then they've taken away movement because you can't actually ADS while sliding, diving, or jumping. So all in all, it kind of feels like they're trying to appeal to the public sentiment that people don't seem to be that fond of Omni movement or movement being too excessive in Call of Duty, while simultaneously adding movement, which is its own entire backfire and just felt very muddled and very confused. And again, I actually don't think the jump looks bad. I actually don't necessarily think Omni movement is necessarily terrible when executed well. And I also feel like having the ability to aim down sight while sliding, diving, or jumping is kind of what most people would expect from a Call of Duty, so locking that behind dexterity is going to be a crazy move, especially when most people would rather take flak jacket. They also did very interesting things like taking out doors from the game, which is something that the wide majority of arcade fans in Call of Duty would prefer, and even I would prefer no doors in a Call of Duty game. So they're appealing to some parts of the franchise's audience, whilst making design decisions that seemingly go against the product that they're trying to create. And herein lies, I think, the first problem. If Black Ops 7 was meant to be a movement shooter that focused on Call of Duty being a fun arcade game, do that. You've got Modern Warfare 4 releasing next year, so you don't need to have Call of Duty Black Ops 7 feel like a grounded shooter. And they kept using the word grounded in this thing a lot. And it's like, well, there's not a lot that's grounded about robots in 2035, and there's not a lot grounded about jumping off a wall, so either lean into it completely or don't lean into it at all. The general consensus and franchise basis being that if this Call of Duty doesn't appeal to a certain type of audience, and it will because there are people who do like Black Ops 3, Black Ops 4, Infinite Warfare, and Advanced Warfare, granted they're not my favorite games, but I actually think Black Ops 7 doesn't look too bad, then you have next year, and you have Modern Warfare 4, which is inevitably going to, by the looks of things, appeal to the same audience they tried to appeal to with Modern Warfare 2. So, even if you are moving from two ends of the spectrum, that's fine, just actually do it. Don't end up in this weird middle ground where design changes seem to be conflicting with each other. But this is one where I think things got worse, because there was a second conflicting piece of information that honestly I think just felt like a bit of a slap in the face. Activision did this entire thing and public post about how they're acknowledging that people, feel a bit worried about cosmetics and how it could be affecting the aesthetics and feel of their game. And they did an entire interview about it. There was an entire section in an interview where they had said, look, it's something we're aware of and it's something we care about. Whilst in the same presentation, announcing that in Season 1 of Black Ops 7, Black Ops 6 carry forward is happening. So all of the skins, the Beavis and Buttheads, the American Dads, everything else that's been added to the game, will be in Season 1 of Black Ops 7. So you will get probably a month, maybe 2 months at best, of Black Ops 7 looking and feeling like Black Ops 7 before it's flooded with Black Ops 6 weapons, skins, and aesthetics that are going to completely change how the experience flows. So having that conversation and interview at all honestly just felt like a bit of a lie. At the end of the day, personally, I feel as though Call of Duty is always going to have those cosmetics. They're never going to turn them off, and they're probably never going to offer the option to turn them off because they keep printing them money. But I do feel as though they had the option and opportunity to go for collaborations that felt like they fit the franchise and perhaps could have fit in the game in a way that made more sense. There are so many other action series and franchises, and honestly I think Terminator to some extent was a good example of that, where they could include characters from those franchises, make a killing in terms of money, without it necessarily feeling like it was completely taking away from Black Ops' general aesthetic and feeling. But instead, now we've got things like Roger from, American Dad running around in a full cartoon getup and Beavis and Butthead, which is aesthetically just completely against anything that's in the game, which means that you're essentially playing Fortnite, which, let's be honest, is kind of the monetization model that they want to go for. And the third and final issue, and probably the biggest slap in the face, is that whether we like it or not, and whether you believe leakers or not, the reality is that Avalon was supposed to be a Battle Royale map. And you can tell that, actually, from just watching Black Ops 6, because all of the cutscenes for Warzone take place in Avalon. All of the story cutscenes, every single piece of it, takes place in Avalon. Which means that it was clearly, very clearly intended to be the actual map for Black Ops 6 and Warzone, and we were pivoted to Verdansk last minute. So seeing Avalon now being gutted for this sort of co-op campaign experience that's allegedly going to have some DMZ-like elements to it, which basically looks like they took the engine code from Modern Warfare 3 Zombies and threw it on Avalon. It feels awful. Like, Avalon looks like a fantastic map, it looks like it was going to be a fantastic Battle Royale map, and for Warzone, it looks like we're literally never going to see it. The current indication for Warzone is that we are going to see some kind of resurgence map come with the first season of Black Ops 7, and as we saw with Area 99, usually that lasts all of a month and a half before the developers realize that nobody likes it and takes it out of the game. So from that presentation, we got a Black Ops 7 game without a huge amount of gameplay that seems to have conflicting design interests. We got essentially lied to about how cosmetics work, whilst also having no acknowledgement of the anti-cheat, no acknowledgement of the server issues, no acknowledgement of basically anything. And arguably, I think the worst thing about it is that there was a lot of good information, but they just left it to their content creators, whilst also not providing those content creators any gameplay. Now, people like JGod and Milo, Mr. Ruffle Waffles, and a few other creators like Swag genuinely did make some good videos about Black Ops 7 and what was in the game, but it almost felt like they got used as some sort of punching bag or proverbial meat shield for the inevitable bad reaction that came from what was a very messy reveal. So all of these content creators who actually had pretty cool information to share about what this was and how it was going to operate ended up basically being the first line of defense when anybody complained about Black Ops 7, and they basically got used as target practice. And then also not supplying those content creators with any kind of gameplay meant that there was basically nothing to back up their thoughts and feelings except for source, trust me bro, which like in the current climate of Call of Duty was just simply never going to work. So I do feel bad for them, because I honestly feel as though they actually had really good insights, some of them had some really good videos and actually got to reveal some pretty cool information, but they basically got thrown to the fire and said, good luck, and hopefully people believe you because you don't have gameplay. So this entire reveal ultimately felt like a car crash, and it felt like Call of Duty is probably not going to acknowledge some of the issues that is going to plague the game going into this new release. And honestly, those conversations, servers, anti-cheat, and skill-based matchmaking are now so large for this franchise that there is no avoiding them. And if they do avoid them, people are less likely to buy into the hype. And I saw a post on Reddit about, you know, people posting, we're so back, and progressively getting more tired with each iteration and not feeling like that's the case anymore. And I'm the same. I hopelessly hoped that a number of different iterations and releases of Modern Warfare 3, you know, Black Ops 6, so on and so forth, each one would maybe bring the game into a better spot or a better situation. And content-wise, Call of Duty is fantastic. They produce a huge amount of content, especially for free in their seasonal updates. That is great. But it's everything else. It's the SBMM, it's the servers, it's the cheaters, it's all of these other issues that are basically just fundamental flaws with Call of Duty that other places are not necessarily doing, you know, 100% better than them at, but definitely are doing better than them. And it's something that they can't seem to master or grasp. I mean, cheating in Call of Duty is the worst I've ever seen it, and I don't think it's ever going to get any better unless they start from scratch again. And I feel no hope about that. And I haven't kind of touched on it entirely, but I've sort of vaguely mentioned it as a result of Warzone. It kind of feels like Warzone's basically being left for dead. They'll probably give them the Black Ops 7 weapons and maybe a new Resurgence map, but that's pretty much it. Looks like Warzone's being left behind by the way this was phrased. Not including it in your reveal at all, also kind of a crazy point. So all of this loops back to this reveal just being a mess. And again, I think it's a shame because I genuinely do believe Black Ops 7 does have some very redeeming qualities that actually a lot of people are going to enjoy. But by leaving so much of the game open to interpretation and not really talking or touching on core parts of the game that are frustration points for the series, and then also touching on some of them like movement and providing conflicting information, it was a recipe for disaster. And it kind of felt like the first line of content creators who had information to reveal ended up being the first line of defense, or essentially some kind of ballistic shield for what was a very botched reveal. And as we've learnt with Call of Duty, they basically don't do anything unless they're forced to. And that's a fact. You know, the majority of positive changes that have come out of this franchise over the last year or two, the fact that they've even mentioned the word SBMM publicly and had a whole public white paper about it was simply because the negative criticism and public conversation got so large that they had to address it. This is a franchise that will try and do what it's doing over and over again without changing a thing or communicating to its audience at all unless it's literally held at gunpoint. And I've yet to be proven otherwise. That simply has been the case for COD over the last couple of years. They have not done anything net positive for their audience unless the online sentiment is so overwhelmingly bad that they feel forced to have a conversation about it. And honestly, it's about time. I genuinely think Call of Duty is going to need a year or two to fix itself and needs to start pivoting away from annual releases, which are ultimately making their games worse. And whether or not those things will happen is an entirely huge question mark. But the reality is, if this game is going to get better and improve, it needs to sell like garbage. And that's the truth. Call of Duty needs to bomb in order for it to actually do well. Because only then, when it bombs, will the corporates behind all of this go, oh, I wonder why that happened. Maybe if we actually listen to what people are saying, we might do well. Because the exact same thing happened to Battlefield. Battlefield 2042 is one of the first games that I, as a content creator and a Battlefield fan, and somebody who has been in countless feedback sessions for games like Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5, wasn't invited to see at all. For 2042, they basically pretended we didn't exist. And that was the truth. And when Battlefield 6 came around, they started talking to their audience incredibly early on. Little by little, some of them for 2 years, some of them for a year and a half, some of them for a year. And it shows. Like, it clearly shows that they've listened to their core audience and that the game, by the looks of things, will be a more successful release as a result of that. It feels to me that this is Call of Duty's 2042. This is the year where they were just so tone deaf and didn't listen to their audience that for once it might finally hit their bottom line. Ultimately, Black Ops 7 will probably still sell very well because that's just how shooters work, and Call of Duty's like FIFA, people tend to buy it every year. But if this is the first time they actually start sliding backwards significantly in sales, it will be the first time they actually have a bit of a reflection and try to think, why did that go badly and how can we improve on it? And quite frankly, it needs to happen. You know, I've sat here on this channel for years now talking about fundamental flaws with this franchise that Call of Duty won't improve on, and they refuse to improve on. And I really love COD. You know, Warzone made me full-time. I have a lot of love for Call of Duty multiplayer as somebody who has played it since the early days of COD 4 and Pro Mod and things like that. So seeing it in this state where it essentially just feels like a corporate money printer every year with no soul behind it is a little bit upsetting, and seeing it not make actual strides and improvements to better itself is upsetting. And I think Modern Warfare 2019 felt like a really big moment for the franchise, not just because of Warzone, but because it felt like Call of Duty modernized, and it felt like it listened, and it kind of made this big jump from being one thing to another thing. And now it kind of feels like we need that again. We need to see the end of COD HQ. We need to see a new anti-cheat. We need to see new server infrastructures and netcode. We need a Call of Duty that is firmly and solely based around improving the things that have been going badly for the franchise over the last couple of years. And that's usually what Treyarch is good at, fixing things in COD that haven't been going well. So to see Black Ops 7 not do that kind of feels like a step backwards. Now, I'm interested to hear your thoughts and feelings in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think. Drop a sub as well. We're on the road to 200k. Black Ops 7 is something that I will cover on this channel. You know, I'm interested to see how it goes, and I definitely will play zombies, irrespective, just because I like zombies. But I'm curious to see everybody's thoughts and feelings on how this has gone, and whether or not you're interested in it this year. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.